So Pranam Dabao, welcome to webinar 3 in our series of webinars focused on the teaching of reading. Last term we kicked off with this series of webinars with Gareth Rain, the head teacher of St Peter's, delivering a session on the science of reading. And then in the second webinar, Alec Mills, the head teacher of Toyner-Rodling Community Primary in Merthyr, gave us a school leader's view of how to effectively implement a phonics programme within a school. Today, as you can see on screen there, we're focusing on the teaching of reading comprehension. I'm delighted to say we've got 3 schools who are sharing their practice with us today. Cyfarthfa Park Primary and Edgersville Primary from Merthyr, and we also have Plenishan High School from Cardiff. Okay. If you missed any of the previous webinars, the recordings are available on the CSC website. Right. If you want to, next slide please, Andy. Okay, so if you have attended the previous webinars, you will be becoming very familiar with this diagram, okay, Scarborough's reading rope. Dr. Scarborough has provided us here with a model to demonstrate how different strands are woven together in the course of becoming a skilled reader. The 2 major strands, as you see, there are language comprehension and word recognition, but those strands are made up of smaller strands and each is of great importance. Next slide, please, Andy. So in today's webinar, we're really focusing on the language comprehension strand of the reading rope. You'll see there that here we're going to look at background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning and literacy knowledge, and the role that they all play in developing reading comprehension and how schools plan and teach these aspects to learners. Next slide, please, Andy. Reading comprehension is a dynamic and complex activity, as illustrated by the image there. It requires the integration of multiple skills, as we've seen in Scarborough's reading rope. Furthermore, comprehension varies depending on the text genre, the purpose, the structure, and this then requires readers to adapt their strategies accordingly. Next slide, please, Andy. There's a study, 1988, by Rector and Leslie, that's often cited as compelling proof of the challenge of reading comprehension and how that challenge varies and how reading understanding can be affected. So in this study, researchers divided a group of young readers into 2 groups. One half of the readers had been shown by previous assessments to have strong reading skills, from decoding to comprehension, while the other half had been assessed as having weaker reading skills. Having separated the learners into these 2 groups, they then looked at their knowledge of baseball. And so we had a group of strong readers, but who had little knowledge of baseball, and a group of weaker readers, but with a solid knowledge of baseball. Both these groups were then given a passage about a baseball game to read and asked a series of comprehension questions. And the result of the study was that weaker readers with the baseball knowledge outperformed the stronger readers who lacked it. These weaker readers simply had the context to understand what had happened, and it was a context that their peers lacked. There's a nice quote on the next slide there, thanks Andy, from Professor Hurst, looking at that complexity and what you actually need in order to be able to comprehend what you read. To grasp the words on a page, we have to know a lot of information that isn't set down on a page. There's a similar quote from Daniel Willingham that talks about how every passage that you read omits information, and that all of this omitted information has to be brought to the text by the reader, because otherwise the passage will be either puzzling or only partly understood. So with that in mind, we've got 3 schools now sharing with us how they kind of like rise to the challenges of teaching comprehension within their settings. The first school is Cyfarthfa Park Primary in Merthyr. I'm delighted to welcome Claire and Sarah from the school. Just a little bit of background information for you about Cyfarthfa Park. So in May 2023, Estyn published a thematic report developing pupils' English reading skills from 10 to 14 years of age, focusing on years 6 to 9. And as part of that report, Estyn visited a very small cross-section of schools across Wales. Cyfarthfa Park was one of the schools that was visited, and following the publication of the report, within the report there were 2 case studies reporting on Cyfarthfa Park's success in developing pupils' reading skills. One looked at the school's effective integration of oracy and reading skills, and 1 on the school's successful use of the guided reading carousel of activities. So although this thematic report focused on year 6 at primary school and year 7 to 9 at secondary, the success of developing pupils' reading skills at the school is based upon the teaching and provision that's provided across the school. And this was acknowledged last year, about this time last year. I don't know how what Claire and Sarah think about it now as they look back, but around this time last year, Estin visited the school for an inspection, and when that inspection report was published, it talked about the strong culture of reading that was embedded across the school and how staff ensure that younger pupils have a secure understanding of phonics, and as they progress, provide wider opportunities to enhance fluency and comprehension through regular and purposeful reading activities. And as a result of the consistent whole school approach to the teaching of reading and numeracy across the school, pupils make exemplary progress in their speaking, listening and reading skills, often from low starting points. So I'm very pleased to say that Claire and Sarah are with us today, and they've agreed to share that whole school approach with us. So over to you both.
Thank you, Gordon. Croeso, welcome. At Cyfarthfa Park Primary School, we follow a hybrid reading approach. And as the name suggests, hybrid theories of reading borrow liberally from both traditional and cognitive theories. This means that reading is both a top-down and bottom-up approach, in that as individuals approach whole text and decode discrete components of those texts, they also build up their vocabularies and personal understanding of grammatical rules, which in turn then helps them decode future whole texts, which in turn helps them build their vocabulary and grammar, as Gordon mentioned earlier on, that was on the Scarborough rope. Our hybrid model forms 2 basic approaches: read-writing phonics, a systematic phonics game. I'm not going to talk about that today because we've already discussed phonics, and our group guided reading and how we approach that at Cyfarthfa Park Primary School. Developing a reading culture at our school is very important, and as you can see by some of the images there, we start with our youngest learners, and we try and impact that love of learning and love of reading with our children. We have a nursery weekly library where we invite parents in, so nursery parents and carers and guardians, and we have a half an hour session on a Friday afternoon. We try and make it look as attractive as possible, and we encourage parents to actually sit and talk about the text with their children. We then model reading and questioning for our children as well, and we found that really does start our pupils' journeys into that love of reading and understanding and comprehension really well. Guided group reading is started in nursery, and it is planned for. We are very foundation learning friendly, but we do believe that it is important to start those early reading processes and developments in our nursery classroom. Something that our children particularly like doing, as you can see in the picture there, is our story skirt time, and we utilise that in guided play. So an adult will have used the story skirt in planned play activities, and then we leave that in our guided play sessions, and the children will retell the story and they will become the teacher. And this really sets them up for when we develop our reciprocal reading in year 2. So we are starting that journey and putting those reading provisions in place. Our reading approaches are carefully planned. These are not things that have happened overnight. This has taken us a very long time. I do have to give credit to Lisa Cheek, the deputy here. When we amalgamated in 2014, Lisa and I went on a journey. So as you can see, it's been 10 years. We went on a journey and we decided that, we wanted children just to be reading in our guided group reading sessions, but we wanted reading to be part of our school culture and everything that we do. So you can see some examples there of some of the things that we do, and Sarah is going to talk about those later on. If you can click on to the next slide, please, Gordon. As I said, that early reading development is important. I just wanted to mention something here. We do follow a phonics scheme, as I said, read, write, ink. However, that phonics scheme does not acknowledge rhyme and an analogy. So we do make a particular effort as well to make sure that we do plenty of rhyme work. There's research out there from Cambridge University, which proves that children that are better rhymers are better readers. So we do make sure that we put some emphasis on rhyme as well. If you can click on to the next slide, please, Gordon, thank you. I couldn't move on without mentioning Voice 21, as this is integral to our curriculum and our reading approaches, and this was recognised by Estin as well on 2 occasions. This again begins in nursery and with our active listening, and progresses to our discussion roles in year 2 and then all the way up to year 6. And Sarah will talk a little bit more about that later on. We've talked about that vocabulary gap. Gordon mentioned that earlier on, and that was something that we were really keen to fill. And so we do have sort of like a word of the week where we introduce key vocabulary to children down in foundation learning, and Sarah will talk a bit more about how we develop vocabulary further up the school as well.
Ready? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you now about how we do our guided reading sessions. As Claire mentioned, they take place from nursery all the way up to year 6, so they do take place in foundation learning, but from year 2 all the way up to year 6, the guided reading session is part of a reading carousel that takes place for about 20 minutes each day. The guided reading session with an adult makes up one component of that carousel. The other, if we could move to the next slide, there you'll see the carousel. That's my carousel. The other 4 activities are a pre or post read session that's linked to the guided reading book, a reciprocal reading session, a giglet session, and a reading attack session. The guided reading takes place with a teacher. If another adult's available, they will guide an extra guided reading session instead of the post or pre-read. We use reading journals to record what they're reading, the date, what pages they've read, but also they record in their books any questions that they would like to put to the group, vocabulary that they don't understand or vocabulary that they would like to magpie, and any responses to reading that we ask them to do. The guided group reading is an instructional approach that involves a teacher working with a small group of children who can read a similar level of texts, and the text is easy enough for students to read, facilitated by adult support. It's an effective, economical and engaging way to teach reading, introduced in nursery through the use of picture books or even just an image. And we feel that the benefits of this approach are that it generates purposeful discussions of texts, encourages the modelling of different reading strategies that can then be applied during independent reading, and they are in the other activities that take place in the carousel. It promotes collaborative learning and gives opportunities to focus on early and higher order reading skills that are carefully planned for. I think that is a really important point to make. We plan in detail in advance with a range of questions planned for discussion. This is crucial. It's no good picking up a book and expecting to be able to complete a worthwhile session without having looked at it before. As Claire mentioned, it's taken the school a long time to get to the point that they're at, and I am a relatively new teacher to the school, and I can honestly say that I was so impressed when I first came and saw these sessions taking place, how purposeful each and every one of the activities are. There's no holding activities. But like I said, we are very lucky. We have an extensive library of books to choose from so that each child has their own text. And that planning, there's a huge bank of planning that has been completed for them. If we go to the next slide, this gives an example of the planning that the teacher would see. The child might view it slightly differently or not at all, because they might not need to. They might see it if in post or pre-read if we want them to respond in writing to that, but not in the guided session. Vocabulary, you can see that says vocabulary check there. That would be the first thing that we do, is explicitly teach vocabulary that they're going to find in this text, so that it doesn't interfere with the fluency when they're reading. They already have knowledge of those words when they're reading. However, I would say if there is a child who's, all the children are unsure of the meaning of a word, we may wait until we read it so that they can use the context to try and understand the meaning of the word within the sentence. So when we started planning this session, we decided to focus on those words that you can see listed because they appear in the first part of the book that we'll be reading, and the words we think they would find difficult. As Gordon mentioned at the beginning, the background knowledge and vocabulary is so important, and there is, like Claire said, a vocabulary gap. And it's so important that we try to level the playing field. My husband works in Powys. I told Gordon this story. He works in Powys, and the year that the national tests were about tractors, their reading scores went through the roof because they understood all the vocabulary, they knew all the nuances of it, and that is a really good example of the difference that it can make.
And similarly, in foundation learning, I had a reception class, and we had a book about a garden, and there was an image in the text where they were mowing the lawn, and the children didn't know what a lawnmower was because the area that they lived in, they lived in a flat. They didn't have a garden, so it was looking at, you know, they couldn't make meaning from that because they couldn't understand what a lawnmower was.
Also, knowledge organisers we would use to give some background knowledge. And then they refer back to those. We've just done conflict, so there was lots of important dates and chronology and things that some of them had no idea about.
If you click on to the next slide, please, Gordon.
The knowledge organiser, further down, I think.
Yeah,
there is an example of one.
There is an example of a knowledge organiser on there.
Oh, don't worry, we'll see it when we get to it. Yeah.
There it is.
Oh, there it is. So basically, we would then read the selected chapter or passage and stop to discuss and check for understanding. After the Read and Reconsidered course, I did change the way that I planned the sessions. So we used to use the Viper structure in order and discuss, but now I've moved the order of the questions so that they come in the order that they come in the book, because it's easier to follow and you don't miss things out.
And I think it's important for I'm reading leader in the school. It's important that we don't sort of stand still. We are still improving and adding bits, and the Reading Reconsidered has really helped with us, and Sarah's done some training with us, and you know, we're implementing set bits.
I'll talk about some of the bits now in a minute. The other thing that I did after that course was that I will often ask them at the beginning of a passage the question that I want them to answer, so they know what information they're looking out for. Like by year 6, we're reading quite long, complex text, and to hold all that information in your head is really quite tricky. So I'll ask them before, and then they put their thumbs up when they get to the answer, or we'll discuss it at the end. So, for example, one of the questions was, in this paragraph, you were looking for 3 ways in which Bendigeid France size is described. When they find it, like I said, they put the thumbs in. Great way to assess understanding. But I might wait until the end. So I might say, what adjectives would you use to describe Branwyn? Use evidence from the text to support your answer, and they can go back and check. And then obviously at the end of the passage, we may do some summarising, where I would say, can you summarise the chapter by telling me the 3 main events? We use the Read and Reconsidered. For example, the Control the Game I found very useful. Before I went on the course, I was very concerned about children zoning out and knowing when their turn to read was coming when they were reading aloud, and it just straight away totally changed the tone of my sessions. They became pacier, snappier. The children were always knowing where they were because they didn't know when they were going to be randomly asked to pick up. And I also model the reading if the pace has been affected and we read a bit faster, or we use accountable independent reading as well, and that I often ask the questions before they read, because then they will read it to themselves and we'll check understanding at the end. We rarely do any written response in our guided sessions. The focus is on reading and discussion, questioning and deepening understanding. They do written responses, but it's usually more for their pre and post read or the read and attack. By the time they get to year 6, the pre and post read is related to their guided book, so I won't go into that too much detail because it's quite similar to what they do. Slides 12 to 14 I think we should be on now, because perfect. So the second part of the carousel that I really want to talk about. We might not have time for some of the others, but the reciprocal reading is quite important at Cyfarthfa. From year 2, we implement reciprocal reading, similar to a guided session, especially as the children get older, where the children read the text together, but they're doing it independently without an adult. We use the Scholastic Connectors books. They've got roles for each child and question prompts on the page to guide the discussion. And there's a lot of predicting, clarifying, questioning and summarising. And we link this with our oracy strategies and the talking roles in Voice 21. Most obvious benefits of it are improved comprehension and metacognition tendencies and skills. And the pupils are fully engaged because they fully fulfil their roles. They really enjoy it. They also benefit from hearing one another's perspectives, interpretations of the text, as well as, you know, practicing the role. Rather than viewing reading as a static activity, reading as a living, moving, fluid process that benefits from intentional sequences as mastery is developed. By year 6, it's really interesting because by year 6, they do start to not use the connectors so much and start to run their own reciprocal reading sessions as a guided session with a child taking the role of the adult. If we share a set of questions with them, the child can act as the adult. And it makes it much more purposeful and interesting for them. They can choose their own books. Again, as well, it encourages collaboration with the application of predicting, clarifying, questioning, summarising within those roles.
But this is something that, like I keep reiterating, it didn't happen overnight. This was something that we've really worked on.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was when Sarah joined us, she could see how it was embedded in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it made it easy to pick up, especially in year 6, we reap what everybody else sows because they are so used to the roles and so used to the processes that they are excellent even by the time they get to us. The last little bit that I'm going to talk about is Reading Attack is a third. Giglets is an online tool that we use. And they respond to reading on the online platform. So that's pretty self-explanatory. But the Reading Attack, that's an independent task where children read independently in their group text, hopefully linked to their GGR book. For example, at the moment, our topic is Land of Legends, looking identity, tradition, pride, myths, legends. So our Reading Attack is a non-fiction text about the history of the Mabinogion to run parallel to us reading the Mab in our guided sessions. And this is where we ask for more responses to reading, really. So if we look at the next couple of slides, if we're looking at inference, we might ask them at the beginning to look at the cover of the book and look for clues. Can you infer? What do you predict? What do you think this book is going to be about?
If you can click on to the next
yeah,
slide.
I think it's the next
Yeah,
couple.
there
There
we
we
go.
go. Responses to reading. Yeah, observe, wonder, infer. We also, they might respond to their reading by doing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, multiple choice questions for a friend, and then they swap books and they answer the questions. They do I Learned, I Wonder. They might do a word study of a book that they found tricky, or even true or false statements based on the text, and then they swap and they check them. So that is where we ask for more written responses to their reading, really. But I think that's about it. That's it.
That is a real whistle.
I think your quote that you put there, that is a lovely quote to finish with. Ruth Miskin, go on.
Yeah, it wasn't just about finding the right system, Ruth Miskin writes. As you know, children learn to read more easily when they enjoy it. I love teaching reading, so they loved learning. Enthusiasm is catching, and hopefully at Cyfarthfa Primary School, we do have that enthusiasm for reading, and it seems to be working.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Diolch yn fawr, Sarah and Claire. Thank you very much for that. As you made very clear there, it is something that you've developed like over time, and it does take time to kind of like get this embedded, but it's really clear how planned and how structured your approach to reading across the school and reading comprehension is. So thank you very much for that. Okay. Moving on. Our next contributor now is Jade. Jade is from Edwardsville Primary. Claire and Sarah mentioned in their presentation there about the impact that Reading Reconsidered had upon their own practice, and many of you there will know how important Reading Reconsidered has been to us at CSE and the training that happens around that. So Jade has actually worked with us at CSE for a number of years. Last couple of years, Jade worked with us as a Reading Reconsidered lead practitioner. And in that role, she produced videos, produced resources for us, and also hosted visits from schools to look at Reading Reconsidered comprehension strategies in action. Okay, so over to you, Jade.
Hello, everyone. So as Gordon said, I'm Jade Rowley. I work at Edwardsville Primary School in Merthyr, and this is now my 5th year in Edwardsville and my 5th year as the literacy coordinator. During my time in the school, I've taught every year group from year 1 to year 6, so I feel like I've got a very balanced first-hand experience of how reading works across our school. So to give a bit of context, we've got 320 pupils, quite a low number of pupils eligible for free school meals in comparison to previous years, but quite a lot of children who have either got confirmed ALN or are on some sort of ALN pathway. So that's kind of our context. We've been looking at reading since I joined the school. So in my first year here, I attended the Read and Reconsider training and did some filing in my own classroom. In the second year then, we rolled our current reading approach out to what was at the time Key Stage 2, and then across the whole school the following year. Last year, we were tweaking and embedding, and as Gordon said, we were lucky to be the lead practitioner school, so we were hosting other schools and showing what we can do. And now this year, we're still focusing on reading, but branching it out more into reading for pleasure. So our approach to reading begins with our phonics program and nursery, and like Kavartha, we use Read Write Inc in our school. Our children make good progress in phonics by following Read Write Inc, and we find that for teaching decoding, this is a really good mechanism for us. Those children who access Read Write Inc have opportunities within their phonics sessions to develop their comprehension skills by answering questions based on simple decodable books that they've been able to read independently. And then in addition to phonics, the children have a daily story time, which I'll explain more about in the next slide, but is more how we teach guided reading with our younger pupils. For those pupils who are finished Read Write Inc, they participate in guided reading sessions every day, either looking at a short text that lasts for a week or by completing a novel study, and so that tends to happen more in years 4, 5 and 6. We then use interventions such as one-to-one phonics and catch-up to support individuals who've got particular challenges in. So as you can see on the slide, we sort of have different approaches for different year groups. So our story time session, our weekly text and our novel studies, regardless of how our children develop their reading comprehension, across the school, we all look at vocabulary on a Monday. We participated in the Words Matter training with CSC a few years ago, and it really brought home to us how impactful that vocabulary is, not just on our pupils' reading, but on their access to the curriculum as a whole. So as a whole school, on a Monday morning, everyone is learning vocabulary. Then depending on the sort of route to guided reading pupils are taking, if it's story time, they'll be doing some knowledge building on the Tuesday, so learning about the kind of wider context of the storybook that they're reading in class, which I'll go through a bit later. On the Wednesday then, the teacher will read and get the pupils to justify their predictions and do some oracy and drama activities based on the text. On a Thursday, the pupils will be doing echo reading and developing their retrieval and explanation skills. And then their final read is a choral read, working on inference, sequencing and summarising. So this starts in nursery and continues up to year 2. And we felt that because pupils had an opportunity within phonics to develop their comprehension for books they can decode, we wanted the story time to be much more challenging, text that maybe the pupils aren't ready to decode yet, but gives them that opportunity to develop those early comprehension skills. So then moving further up the school, as children are finishing phonics, they will then kind of do different approaches to reading again, which I'll go through later, and working on those Vipers questions as well. And we try to embed our knowledge building further up. So the children will read the text and then look at the kind of knowledge they need to know to understand it as they're going through. So on the next slide, you'll see an example of our vocabulary grid, which our pupils use for their whole class guided reading sessions. So this isn't what it would look like for the story time. I'll show you that in a moment. But for all those children off phonics, they fill in one of these grids every Monday based on what they are reading. So yeah, as I said, we've got a very mixed catchment, and we find that the vocabulary of children does vary quite greatly between families. So by starting each week this way, we can kind of ensure that we're closing that gap and all our pupils can access the text we're reading that week. So this format is standardised and consistent across the school. Pupils are very used to this now. This is the 4th year that we've been using it, so it's well embedded now. So we provide pupils with a child-friendly definition. They have lots of discussion with a partner and whole class based on the pictures, and then they will then apply that vocabulary by writing it in their own sentence, which can be linked to the story, it can be linked to the picture, or it can be from their imagination. It's completely their choice. And then these words are regularly referred to over the course of the week and across weeks to help them become embedded in children's long-term memory. So on the next slide, I'm going to ask Andy to play a video for you in a moment, showing our lovely Mr. Crowley teaching a year 2 class some new vocabulary for their guided, for their story time text that week. So if we could watch the video and I'll explain a bit afterwards.
Now that's a big word, isn't it? Now we haven't come across this word before. An apprentice is somebody who works for somebody else so that they learn how to do the job. Okay, and let me explain first, then we'll have a chance to use it in a sentence. So an apprentice, imagine you were my apprentice, I'm the teacher, and I might ask somebody like Tyler to come up here and do little bits of my job for me. I'll teach him how to do a little bit of my job, and then he will do some of my job for me. So Tyler will be my apprentice. So you've got your master, you've got your boss, and the apprentice is his little worker who's learning how to do the master's job, so that one day he'll be the master. All right. I'm going to give you 1 minute to turn to your partner, not to write a sentence, but to come up with a sentence using that word apprentice. For example, Tyler is my apprentice in the classroom. 1 minute, tell your partner a sentence with the word apprentice. I'm going to spotlight somebody first, and I am going to spotlight Elijah, who's sitting in front of me, because I think we've got a really lovely sentence here now before I listen to everyone else. Elijah, can you give me your lovely sentence?
Sounds like the volume's cut out. I don't know if that's the same for everybody.
My apprentice is Vincent, and he will become.
I just paused. Was it okay up until just now, or?
Yeah, it disappeared, then it came back on just as you paused it. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Let's try again.
Okay. Oh.
Okay, so to explain the context then, so in our story time sessions, we go through the text in advance, we pick out the words we think children won't have heard before. We will share the word visually with them on the screen so they've seen it written, but like with a word apprentice, you can imagine year 1 and 2 pupils potentially aren't ready to read a word like that yet, so it's all oracy based. So we will give them the definition, we will use different examples. Children then use their partner talk to come up with their own sentences, and we'll do this for about 5 different words across the session. Then at the end of the session on whiteboards, pupils have the chance to pick 1 or more of the words they've learned and try and put that into a sentence of their own. So even though there is a little bit of writing, the focus is on oracy with our little ones and using those words in context correctly before they then come to read the story. So the story this was based on was Oliver Twist, so that the children then, when they heard about Oliver being Fagin's apprentice, they were able to understand what that meant. So moving on, alongside vocabulary, we found that knowledge building was particularly important for developing our pupils' cultural capital and understanding of the world, so that they can access the text they read. Again, something that differs very considerably between different pupils. So depending on where the children are at in their learning journey, this could involve watching a video, it could involve undertaking their own online research or research in the library, or through embedding non-fiction into their novel study. So for example, on the slide, you can see the children watched part of a video from the BBC about the workhouse. in relation to Oliver Twist, and then had some questions to answer in class by linking that knowledge to the story of Oliver Twist. And then in the next example, Friend or Foe by Michael Morpurgo. This was a year 6 text, and we were studying this book right at the start of a topic on World War II. So we wanted to make sure that children fully understood about evacuation and the needs for it before they started reading the text. So it looks different in different parts of the school, but the underlying principles are the same, that children need to know about things to be able to understand what they are reading. So in these guided reading sessions then, children have lots of different opportunities to decode and read the text, and all children will read a text at least 2 times before there's an expectation of them answering comprehension questions. So the first read allows children to read the story for pleasure and for it to flow. I think it's called a contiguous read, but there's not that pressure for them to stop and answer questions. So subsequent to that, then we go into sort of some close reading and going into that nitty-gritty of different sentences, doing close reading of particular passages, and supporting pupils in developing their independence to sort of find important information and track ideas across a larger text. We actually find this is particularly helpful for our pupils with additional learning needs, because they will always hear that text read aloud before they are expected to read passages on their own or with a partner. So it builds pupils' confidence, and the variety of ways in which pupils are asked to decode helps to keep them engaged and on task, because it's different from day to day. As with Cyfarthfa, we focus our questions around the VIPERS acronym, which you can see on the next slide. So when the children are able to decode the text and have that really important vocabulary and background knowledge in place to access the text, we'll move on to different styles of questioning. The questions form the basis of class discussion in story time and in a guided reading, but then in guided reading there's an extra expectation that pupils will then write their answers. So in story time, pupils will do lots of oral discussion, partner talk, class talk, and then at the end of their story time session, we'll have that opportunity to write one artful sentence to show their understanding of the text. So there's one particular question the teacher will hone in on with that expectation that children will respond. And it might just be a key word, or it might be drawing a picture with the nursery, but just that expectation that they can respond in other ways as well, and instilling those foundations for later on. In guided reading, the children are taught specific strategies for answering different question types. So for example, children will understand that a retrieval question will have an answer in the text that they need to go and find. And an inference question will require them to have their own ideas but find evidence from the text. Also give sentence parameters for different questions. So in the video that we'll play in a second, the children are explicitly told they need to use the word because in their answer, because the day before that was lacking. So we're picking up on those misconceptions on how to actually answer those questions successfully. So in our approach, we usually read the question, discuss what we need to look like as a class, look for in the text as a class, and then we'll either read or reread a section of the text to find the answer. We'll then have partner and whole class discussion before the children are expected to record their answer in writing. We will then look at sample answers from around the class, and then pupils are given that time to improve, review, and edit their original answers. And that editing time is the most important part of our process, because it gives the children that opportunity to go back and reflect. Writing for reading has had a real impact on our pupils being able to articulate their reading really effectively. And I think it's been one of the most impactful changes to reading we've made under our new approach over the last 5 years. Previously, we had an obviously only approach with our guided group reading carousel, so this was quite a big change for us. So if we can play the video clip, hopefully you can see what that looks like in practice.
Why was it necessary to evacuate children when World War II commenced? The answer is in paragraph 1. I want you to read paragraph 1 again on your own silent solo. I'm going to give you 30 seconds on to go. I want you to tell your partner 2 of the reasons in paragraph 1 why it was important children were evacuated out of the urban areas in Wales. Tell your partner what you've read. Talk about it. Then one reason why it was important to evacuate children.
Because children living in an isolated area might be bombed.
Yeah, and which words in the text tells you that they might be bombed? They're at risk of something. There's an imminent threat of aerial bombing. So you've got the information in the text to help you. Other reason have we got why it's important that they evacuated.
So they can safeguard all the children.
So they can safeguard all the children. So you are going to write me one article sentence to answer question 1. That sentence is going to contain the word because. It was important to evacuate the children because, and I want you to quote from the text, okay? We've heard the 2 quotes, so you can talk about aerial bombings or you can talk about safeguarding children in your answer. You have got 90 seconds to write it down, share that answers. If your answer is the same, tick it. If your answer can be added to, then you can fix it. Can you show your answer, please?
It was necessary to evacuate children as World War II commenced, for there was an imminent threat of aerial bombings to safeguard people and vulnerable populations.
Fantastic answer. Good. And share your answer, please.
Children
Really good answer. Well done.
So that video clip was actually the teaching about knowledge building activity for friend or foe that was on a few slides back. So in that clip, there was the process of the first read, asking the question, second read, partner talk, writing their answers, sharing their answers, and then editing and improving. I don't know how well you were able to hear with the sound quality, but the girl who shares her answer at the end of the video has an identified additional learning need, which impacts her literacy skills. And she was really clearly able to articulate her understanding of why evacuation was necessary, and that it has come through all of these skills I've been talking about and sort of building her up ready to answer those questions. So that's like a whistle-stop tour of what we do at Edwardsville. Over the next few slides, I just want to show the impact it's had. So on the slide, you can see our All Wales data for our Year 6 cohort. These were the first children who trialled the approach in the initial trial period and have had this in place now for over 4 years to support their reading. As you can see in Year 2, we were very concerned about the children as they were well below national expectations. And yes, that was partly to do with COVID, but there was other sort of factors at play, and we decided we needed to change our approach to do justice to these children. And as you can see now, they are performing, you know, as a cohort above the national average, and they're sort of growing year on year in how well they are doing. The trend then continues on the next slide with our Year 4 and 5 pupils, and again on the following slide with our Year 3 pupils. Our Year 2 pupils are still below that national average. However, they are closer to that central line on our All Wales test than any cohort that came before. So we're confident that, you know, after they've had a bit longer, they will be flying just like the rest of our children are. So when I first spoke to our head teacher about wanting to change our reading approach, I'm sure she won't mind me saying that she was easily able to see the benefits for the majority of our children, but had concerns about how our pupils with additional learning needs would manage with longer texts, working whole class, and being expected to write their answers down every day. So during the initial trial period, we tracked our 3 most struggling readers in, at the time, our Year 3 cohort, now our Year 6s, to ascertain the impact this approach would have on their progress. And from the data you can see on the slide in front of you, these pupils all achieved accelerated progress in that first year and have been able to sustain that progress over time with their reading ages and their standardised scores from their All Wales tests continuing to increase. So safe to say, my head teacher is no longer worried. And in fact, we think our pupils with additional learning needs actually benefit from this approach as much as, if not more than everybody else. It's really helped them to become more confident readers and to make that accelerated progress. And on the following slide, you can see, you know, the pupils in their own words, their views on since we've changed reading in our school, the benefits of it. So they're finding it interesting, it's increasing their confidence, they're enjoying learning about the vocabulary, and they find that reading a text multiple times and building it up over the course of a week is really helpful to them. So I know I can wax lyrical about what we do at Edwardsville Primary School, but you know, it's all about the children at the end of the day, and the fact that they're enjoying it and seeing the benefits is all we can ask for. So that is us at Edwardsville.
Thank you, Jade. You did indeed wax lyrical. That's very true. So well, but it was fantastic for you to put together the approach and how you have adapted, how you've used other strategies and how you've worked those for your particular pupils. And it's lovely to see the impact then at the end. So thanks very much for sharing that. Thanks, Jade.
Thank you.
I think it's also really interesting to be able to pick up on common threads between Jade's presentation and what we're going to hear now from Claire Lockwood from Lanishan High. So we're really pleased to have Claire on board, and she's the head of English and associate assistant head teacher at Lanishan High. And like Jade, Claire's also been lead practitioner for Reading Reconsidered with us at CSC. And her team's engagement with evidence-informed approaches to the development of reading comprehension have contributed towards some really favourable comments from Estin on learners' confidence when reading aloud, their expression, the complexity of text that's planned for, and the range of strategies that they have to understand more complex texts independently. Claire will also talk about the power of carefully integrating reading and writing, which will have commonality with what we've just heard from Jade, in order to develop and deepen comprehension. So I'll hand over to.
Thank you. Yeah, it does actually lead quite nicely on from Jade. A lot of what you were saying there, we're developing as we move into secondary school. So next slide, please, Andy. Just a bit of context for you, working with quite a different size school to a primary, 1,700 students in our school. You can see our FSM there. That does alter year upon year within our actual school. We've got quite a decent percentage of ALN learners as well. The department itself is huge, so managing that when we're bringing in something new, it can be challenging at times, and then trying to take things whole school has extra challenges as well. We are making progress with our Reading Reconsidered and also our writing strategies as well. So I'll move on to the next slide. So when the new curriculum came into being, we kind of saw that as an opportunity to change, as many of us did. And a couple of the members of the department had been on the Reading Reconsidered training and had felt that it would be really beneficial. And because we were starting, again, in many cases, it was an opportunity to bring in those new skill areas and how we could apply them to new schemes of learning. The beginning part of our process was the vocab instruction, and we realised that too many times we were playing the guessing game in class, asking students what words meant or how they could be applied, and we now use the explicit vocab instruction, which I'll show you in just a moment. And we're also now developing how we teach close reading across the department, and hopefully that will go across the school as well in due course. We've also very carefully considered the texts that we're using, thinking about not only our fiction text but our non-fiction texts. So there's lots of things that Reconsidered has helped us to look at, as well as our own professional experiences and knowledge of other evidence-informed research. Next slide, please. So these are some of the texts that we teach across years 7, 8 and 9. Lots of them excerpt-based, but I think you can see just by glancing through those texts that there is a significant variety. We did very much focus on the 5 reading plagues, or 5 plagues of reading, I should say, which that's not necessarily, not everyone necessarily knows exactly what that means, but looking at text to ensure that we'd got a range of archaic language, that we were looking not just at linear but also at non-linear texts, the complexity of the text that we were teaching, the level of symbolism and imagery, the texts, and also resistant texts, those that challenge the students. And some of them are whole text study, as you can see from that slide. Others are excerpts, but the students have really brought into them. And when we first thought about doing some of these texts in year 7 and 8, and even when I mentioned it to the department, and my second department did as well, they were a little bit resistant themselves, thinking about texts like Great Expectations and Shakespeare and Jane Eyre. But we've carefully chosen the elements within those texts to teach back to our students. And as an A-level literature teacher, I'm really hoping that it also gives that really good ground for them to move forward into GCSE and beyond as well. Next slide, please. Within that text selection, we've also thought carefully about our texts, and we do a lot of non-fiction alongside the fiction that they're studying. So if a text has a particular theme or idea, then we'll bring in any articles, any speeches, any videos. So we do have quite a lot of non-fiction alongside our fiction. We also have non-fiction schemes of learning, which are thematically linked. Can I just ask a question? Is this actually finishing in 5 minutes? Because I know that I'm not going to have time to finish.
No.
No, we
Sure.
won't.
No.
Okay, thank you. One of the schemes of learning that we have in year 9 is sexism, which can be quite a controversial topic, to say the least. But as you can see from just a very small section of the text there, we're not looking always at that in its most controversial way. We look at sporting and clothing, as well as some of the other more controversial topics, and we also look at fiction within that as well. But this text selection that you can see on the slide, that's taken from much larger text that we would read in its entirety to the class, getting them to follow. Some students use reading rulers, and we do reinforce the importance of following, which I'll explain in just a moment as well. And then they would read just a very small section and have a question that focuses their attention. So helping them to break down the bigger text into its smaller component parts, which also then helps them in assessments and further on in their GCSEs as well. One of the things that we really wanted was to expose our students to a much broader range of literature, and we'd started to do that a few years ago with our tutor time reading programme, and I know that some of the primary schools have also alluded to this idea of reading 20 minutes every day. We don't unfortunately have the luxury of 20 minutes every day with our students. We use form time, but it's used for a lot of other things as well. But we've got books that every single student across year 7 to 10 are read to by their teachers. And I did a lot of research alongside one of my colleagues to find that being read to whilst a student is reading along is extremely empowering. It improves their reading speed, improves their vocabulary understanding, the pronunciation of vocabulary, their punctuation. So it has a huge impact on their reading, but also then on their writing and their oracy skills. So whenever we are reading a text in class, we always insist the students follow with us so that we have that engagement, but they're also experiencing the benefits as I've just outlined. Next slide, please. One of the things that we do a lot of now is explicit vocab instruction, and this is where we have lists of words. You can see this is one of a section here, that kind of blue slide is part of our year 7 curriculum outline. So we have curriculum outlines for year 7, 8 and 9 so that we all know that we are following along the same lines as each other, and that we know what the assessments are going to be. And within that, we also explicitly teach the vocabulary that we think the students could benefit from learning alongside the scheme of learning that they're being taught. This is one of the lists here from year 7, and it's relevant to the scheme, and they get taught this vocabulary and are also assessed on it. Next slide, please. So this is one of the explicit vocab kind of forms or formats that we use, where we give them the word, we tell them the word classification, we go through the definition, very similar to the video that we just saw from Jade's school, where it was done in an oral form. So we will actually orate this with the students. If there are any other versions of that word, then that becomes the related parts of speech. So obviously sometimes a verb, there's a noun form or an adjective form. Then we give them a sentence where the word is used in context, just as I say the teacher in the previous video did, but he orated. We give them an image as well, so they can try and maybe make the connection. And then they will have a task that is what we call their active practice. So where the younger children did theirs orally, we would get them to do this in the written form. And often there are a couple of tasks. So this is a year 7. I predominantly teach years 9 to 13. So for my year 9s and 10s, I will give them a couple of tasks, and they may have to do a because sentence, they may have to complete a sentence, they may have questions to answer, but using the active practice. And then within the scheme of learning or the next few lessons, we would be expecting the students to be able to use that word in its context in any pieces of writing. I did this the other day with my year 9 students. We were doing, we covered the words objectification and misogyny. And then I gave them merits if they're able to use them accurately within their work without me explicitly instructing where they should be used. And we do this a lot. And then the students, if you can move to the next slide, revise those words. They know that out of the list of words that they've got, then they may be tested upon them, but the active practice continues then in an assessment. So they don't know which words they may be assessed on, and you can see there that they get kind of either give an example of, or they have the words that they should know within a sentence. So for them to understand the first question, what connotations might the colour red have, they obviously have to understand the word connotations and have learnt that. So it's less of a focus on spelling and more of a focus on them being able to use and understand the meaning of the words. And that has worked really, really well across all year groups. It's also the one area that we've also taken whole school. And very successfully, I worked with the maths department, and they were really, really good. And some of them have responded so positively to how it's benefited the students and their learning in their maths lessons as well. So I always think when you're looking at English and maths, there's not always the crossover, and there's a lot of resistance. And it just kind of goes to show that having these levels of literacy and the format, the formats can help all subjects. I know in primary schools you're working on that more, but in secondary school we sometimes kind of struggle across those two subject areas. Next slide, please. So moving on from vocab to the close analysis, close reading, analysis and understanding of texts. And we also were finding before we'd kind of gone through the Read and Reconsidered training that sometimes we were giving very large texts to the students and asking them to answer these big questions. A very common one in English is, how does the writer persuade, or how did the writer create an impression, or what impressions is created, or sorry, what impressions are created within this extract of, and that word would be given. And they were struggling to be able to break down the text. So we now are using different elements. We use layered reading. So we may read the whole text in one full go to the students, just so they get an understanding and an engagement with the text, and maybe briefly talk about it. And then we'll break the text down into smaller sections, testing their understanding via very pertinent questioning. Then we'll deepen that with some analysis, again via questioning, and then process and deepen that comprehension again via their writing about that text in answer to questions. And by the end of that process, they are able to answer the big question, but they're also able to apply that same approach to an unseen text without the teacher breaking it down. And that's obviously the ultimate aim, is that students can decode and take apart and analyse these texts themselves without us holding their hand through it. So the next slide, please. So this is an example of one of the texts that we might do. It might be that kind of length. Younger students may have an A4 length, but this is a year 9, but that's year 9 all abilities. And we do have, as all schools do, very low reading ages for some of our year 9 students, but all of us would do this text. So we would read this through in its entirety. As I'm reading it, I may do some implicit vocab. So as I come across a word that the students may not be familiar with, I would just re-say that word and using a synonym, brief explanation, not doing any real stop-start. And if they have any questions, again, I'd ask them to make a little note on their sheet. And then at the very end, I would take questions. So they have the fluency and fluidity of hearing the whole text in one go and trying to make sense of it in that first read. Okay, what we would then do is questioning. Now, this isn't from that text, but it's another example. establish an understanding of text via questioning, and pronouns I think are such an important part of a student's understanding, but sometimes something that we overlook, particularly when we are competent readers ourselves. So this is from a book called The Giver that we do in year 8, and the receiver is a character. And so the receiver says, so it became obsolete, and the students have to, write down what the pronoun it refers to. That might be an oral response, very more likely to be a mini whiteboard activity so that we can check the understanding of all students, and also then overcome or, hopefully support with any issues, anybody who's not understanding, because if they don't understand that, then they probably can't go on to understand any more of the text. And the next stage of that then is developing analysis via questioning. So we can see here some examples from a text. Again, the same text, The Giver, that we teach in year 8. The text says, even transmitting that tiny memory to, I think it lied to me just a little. And what we've now done is we've changed it up we want them to focus on that word lightened, but rather than just asking them, what does lightened mean, or how does it work? We give them an alternative. So we show them that lightened and helped could be used in that same sentence and have a similar context, but we're then asking them to actually try and understand what the difference is between using the word lightened or helped. And so it develops their analysis. This would probably begin with something like a turn and talk. So just like the I think it was in the previous primary school with Jade's primary school, they did the same, like turn and talk and discuss this. I think they were creating their sentence. We may be like turn talk to a partner for 60 seconds. What's the difference, or what's the benefit of using this word over this word? And then they may come back and do it in a written form, but developing that analysis via questioning. And then we've got the kind of the deepening their comprehension then through writing. And this is the part where I think Reading Reconsidered and the Writing Revolution work so beautifully together. And a few people have said to me, well, isn't Writing Revolution about their writing, not about their reading? And my point is, well, they need to have knowledge to be able to do the writing. So this is examples taken from GCSE, but we do this throughout Key Stage 3 as well. And Larry LaSalle is a character from a text that we teach at GCSE. But I need them to be thinking in more detail about the character. So first of all, I've gone through maybe topic sentences and sentence types rather. So looking at declarative, interrogative, exclamative or exclamatory, and imperative, and giving them something that I want them to write in the style of those sentences around the character. This is still testing their understanding of the character and their reading comprehension, because if they haven't understood the character of Larry, then they can't do this task. But what it does now is it gives them a much more articulate response to the character. Also then looking at, once I've kind of outlined what that looks like, I'm then giving them another character, and this time they have a go themselves. So that maybe what a lot of us call the I do, we do, you do. And then also using the because, but, so sentences, which I use all of the time. I use it in so much of my teaching, but I'll use it usually in reference to a text. So be it a non-fiction text or a fictional text or a poem, whatever I'm teaching to the class, I will use the because, but, so sentences. Now they do need to be thought through. Anybody who's tried using these sentences, not all of those conjunctions work for every single sentence stem that you put before. So you do have to test that they work. The because are excellent, and they're a really good starting point, giving reasons, because as was outlined in the previous video from the primary school, the students aren't always articulating their reasons in enough detail. But then we can also move to thinking about kind of a contradictory point, a change of direction. Can we see things from a different point of view? Now that is very much testing the students' comprehension, but in a very well articulated sentence. And then we've also got the consequent sentence with the so. This sort of activity I often start by using mini whiteboards, just to see if the students have understood the process of the sentence stems and how to complete them, but then they form part of their kind of bigger answers and their comprehension and their analysis. Okay, next slide. I've also used this at Key Stage 5, and I think we sometimes think once we get to A level that we don't teach in the same way, and I very much do. I've found this really invaluable, and the students as well. They get much bigger spaces. A lot of these won't just stay at one sentence, they'll become paragraphs. But I want them to understand and embed quotations. And when you're teaching a text at Key Stage 5, it's really hard sometimes for the students to work out what are the main, the most important quotes, and how can I do something. And when they have had to recall them in exam conditions, because they're closed book exams, then this will also help them to think about how much they can do with just 2 words. In the case of that first part on there, the quote from Kent in King Lear when he says see better, and it's getting them to understand that it's 2 words and they will remember those words, but how much can they do with it? And if they can take that quote in different directions, it will show the examiner their excellent comprehension skills and their analytical skills, but it will help them to develop within the classroom how they can also recall that information and do more with what they've got. And so I do that a lot. As you can see, there are examples there of homework tasks and classwork tasks as well. So I think that these things can be used across the ability range and across the key stages. So finally, some of the things that we've learned along our way that would hopefully help anybody who's also looking to go this direction is to maybe start with a particular unit of work or a particular year group. We didn't start with looking at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13. We did start with our year 7 and we looked at particular units and kind of made our progress that way. Then kind of in the process, create examples that can be adapted for other subjects and schemes of learning. So make templates that staff can adapt. So the vocab instruction sheets that I showed you earlier, like that's the format that we use, and I've got that template saved so I can very easily go to it and make that for any lesson, and that can take me a few minutes. We're doing exactly the same at the moment with exit tickets, and within our exit tickets at the end of lessons there'll be reading reconsidered ideas, there'll be writing revolution ideas, but I've already got the format and the template. My Because But So has got a template that I literally transfer in, so it doesn't take any time. Model how it's then taught to your department or your teams. We've done a lot of this, and I know my second in department has done this recently and said, they know what to do. It's just a reminder. I said, no, not everybody does. We assume that people do understand, but sometimes when we're very, very busy, unless we're actually practically shown how to do that thing, unless we're taught it almost like we teach our students, then it can be quite hard to grasp something. And I know that's how I felt, and I'm quite happy for somebody to sort of literally teach me like I'm a child, and I can ask the questions and I can feel how it feels as that child, so that I can then learn to teach it that way myself. Then to see how it's working, we've used lots of book looks. That's not necessarily moderation, but just looking at the books to see how our resources have been adapted, to see the levels of progress. Short burst writing to develop the comprehension and formulate their ideas. That's great on many whiteboards, but can also then be transferred to exercise books once the students have got confidence. And alongside all of this, I use the methods of participation all of the time from the Teach Like a Champion courses and from the book that I've kind of studied. That particular section on methods of participation I think is excellent, because it enables you to use all of those comprehension skills alongside those methods. And the impact it's had. Yeah, we have had an impact, positive improvement in students' reading ages. We are currently first within our family of schools. Very, very strong English language GCSE outcomes among some of the top schools in the whole of the region. And really importantly, our students have much greater confidence in approaching those longer and more complex texts.
So I think I mentioned at the beginning, Claire, like also, recognition from Estin about the impact that your work's had. I won't read that out to you. You're very capable of doing a contiguous read on that yourself, as we've heard. So an enormous thank you to all of our presenters, and I think what's come through really clearly has been some of those consistent approaches just applied across the age ranges, and the impact that we've seen from some of the pedagogy. If you are looking for any support from CSE with discussing or implementing anything that you've seen or heard in this session, then please do get in touch. Just a quick heads up that coming soon on the 3rd of February, we still have a few places on our effective teaching of guided reading. That's a single one-day event, and the QR code will take you to the website where you can book your place. Also, we've just confirmed that we'll be running cohort 12 of our Reading Reconsidered programme. So that is a 3-day professional learning programme, and the dates that have just been confirmed are June the 6th, the 20th, and July the 4th. It's not yet live on the website itself, but please do keep an eye out. That will be coming soon.